So this next group is still small businesses, but now we're talking about larger MSPs. And there's a reason that I'm bringing this to you. So again, I want to set your mind here about how to think about this situation. So this particular section is about deploying at volume. So the section prior was 1 to every now and then deployments. But for these larger MSPs, they have to consider volume. So I'm going to skip down to the bottom of the slide for a second. And there's 2 reasons that we might hit scaling at volume. The first is driven by the MSP themselves and deploying what we call a fleet. So this MSP, again, they're selling multiple IT services to a particular SMB. We are just one of those services. They may choose that they want to deploy to everyone. If they've never sold DR before, they may choose to swap out an incumbent. But in this case, they might be selling to almost all of their customer base and needing to deploy at mass. That is a fleet scenario. The second scenario is when it's not driven by the MSP, but it's rather driven by the actual end company. So in this case, thinking about it could be a larger SMB or it could be a mid-sized company that has multiple locations, and they want all of the locations to have protection, and they hire these larger MSPs to do that deployment. So now we're doing volume deploy, but it's all the same company, still a small implementation. So coming back to what this is, these larger MSPs are absolutely selling to these SMBs disaster recovery. So we're no longer talking in ambiguous terms or talking about business continuity and things. These customers may or may not be a little savvier. The ones that are larger will be. There's now some mix of the SMB being not technically savvy and perhaps some of these MSPs serving customers that do have some in-house IT. So there's a little bit of a mix. Turnkey is still necessary and in fact an imperative because you're deploying in mass. You need to have common deploy across. And now to your point about footprint, now we're talking 1 to 4 servers. We're talking less than 3 terabytes. So it's still a small data storage amount. These customers are going to have VMware or Hyper-V. They're going to be using some of those technologies. Easy deployment, the key for this, we're going to come back to that. But as I set up 2 scenarios here, one for fleet and one for distributed site, we're going to break this section in 2, and I'm going to turn the first over to Chris.
Excellent, excellent. So when we're talking about doing deployments and we're talking about all this with our customers, it's always great to hear from the vendor about what we're doing and what we think. But let's actually bring one of our customers here. We're going to bring in Simpatico, and we're going to bring in Cory Ruthardt to actually talk about his experience with dealing with our technology and how they're using it within their environment. Cory, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. So before we jump into the tech stuff, one quick question for you. Is there something you can tell us about you that is something maybe some of your customers don't know, or a hobby you have, or something like that?
I am a Texan, so I would say hunting, fishing, anything to do outdoors. Definitely something that I spend as much time as I can doing.
Excellent, excellent. So let's go ahead and jump into looking at, who is Simpatico and what's your primary business? What do you guys do to make a living?
Sure. So Simpatico is a managed service company. We've been around for quite a while. We've got a little over 600 customers across 13 states, primarily southwestern part of the U.S., Texas to California. Although we do have customers all over the world. We've got pretty good mix between different verticals. So we've got retail, aerospace, manufacturing, working with a lot of DoD type contractors as well. So pretty good reach.
Excellent. So you kind of covered a little bit of who are your typical customers there, but let's go ahead and jump into why do they seek you out?
A lot of times they're looking for some kind of supplemental. We deal with typically larger SMB all the way up to mid-size. So anything from 20 or so users up to several hundred users. Typically they have a pretty big footprint, but a lot of distributed. We do a lot of work with private equity companies. So they may have multiple businesses or businesses with several sites across the country. And so that's really where they come to us for that type of a mix. I failed to mention when I was introducing Simpatico that there are three primary divisions of our business. So we have the MSP that's been around for a long time. Cybersecurity is something that we hear about all the time. Cyber is a new division of our business. We started about 4.5 years ago now, and we've really built out that practice as well. And then we have a physical security business as well. So we do everything low voltage, access control, cameras, and really integrate all of those things. So it's very security first type implementation. So a lot of times customers are coming to us because they want that kind of a support environment where we can secure from the perimeter all the way through to data center services.
Excellent. So when we're looking at your customers, what are you guys solving as far as specific to DR that they didn't have before? So what are you bringing to the table there?
Yeah, I think that changes depending on what customers we're looking at. On the smaller side, a lot of those customers don't have DR solutions. I mean, they may put stuff onto a flash drive and take it home every now and then, but they typically don't have good IT governance, and they don't have a lot of that formal DR type scenario. So when we bring in a solution like Infrascale, we help build those things out. We put in a full solution where they actually have good protection schemes in place, and even a plan to restore when something happens, so that we do have good outcomes in those. When we're looking at larger customers, oftentimes they will have something in terms of an incident response or disaster recovery plans, but they don't have the technology stack to really implement that. Or when it's a private equity type company, there's a lot of disparate systems out there. So being able to unify all of those things into a single pane of glass, single portal, regardless of what the underlying technology of those different sites or businesses are, has been a huge value for us to be able to go in and kind of leverage what's there and not have to replace everything.
So excellent. So as a partner goes, you've been an excellent partner. You've deployed a lot of our solutions. So I guess the question would be, why did you pick us? Why did you pick Infrascale?
Yeah, we've been using Infrascale for a little over 3 years, not quite to 4 years yet. And I believe we were using Datto previously. Not to say that they don't have a good product, but we had some issues trying to get some of the things at scale, deploying for large deployments. And this really made a huge difference in terms of going out with our market. I love the approach that Infrascale takes when we go into a customer environment. The fact that we don't have CapEx expenditures for some of these smaller businesses where they subscribe for the IBDR cloud service, they get an appliance that comes on site, they get kind of the same monthly payment. Doesn't matter how many times they restore or what they're doing. They're really just managing that storage size, but everything's included for them at that price. It really helped fit our business model and the way that we're growing and scaling across the country. And it works really well for a lot of our customers.
Excellent. So where do you typically deploy the solution?
We deploy everywhere. We've got customers, again, kind of all over the place. And there are a lot of different solutions out there. We utilize a couple of them. So the cloud service that Brian highlighted a little bit earlier, we use that in some instances when we're doing SaaS backups. But again, we want a holistic approach to that DR platform. So we're deploying in a bunch of different scenarios, but we almost always have an appliance on site, and then we're using the cloud replication as well. And that's the one that we feel is kind of the best bang for your buck.
Excellent. So now, how do you typically deploy the solution? And then also, how long does it take? And I know how long does it take typically depends on some customers and how much availability they have, but I'll go ahead and throw that out there and see how you guys work with that.
Sure. So our process, again, we do a lot of these, so we have it down to pretty good science. But it's a month or less is our typical deployment timeframe, and that includes doing the initial sales consultation, going out and speccing the environment, understanding what the needs of the customer are, and ordering an appliance from Infrascale. Now, that's about a 2-week process to get the appliance in, get it pre-staged on site, and then it's really just scheduling with a customer to go get it in place. Some of that time frame for a month, we never want to go in, especially if we're replacing a solution. We don't want to go in and rip out what's in there immediately. We want overlap. We want to make sure we've got good backups and we have lots of continuity of data before we pull anything out. So that does contribute to that time frame a little bit, but it's a really quick deployment.
Okay, excellent. Now, when we look at this, how are you guys managing it? We're going to get into a demo later about the dashboard and how to manage it, but how do you personally manage and monitor the solution?
Yeah, that's another one of the big reasons why we went with Infrascale. Previously, we had at least 2 engineers dedicated to managing all of the BDR type applications for our customers. Because we have a unified platform, we have good proactive alerting, we get backup confirmation and boot confirmations. We've gotten that down to where we have different resources that are looking at this all the time in our escalation resources. But it's about a half of a full-time person to manage all of those appliances across multiple customers. So for us to be able to see that kind of information at a really high level, dig into any kind of trouble areas, but get a lot of that proactive alerting has saved us a ton of time and headache. And I know that, with a lot of our customers for Simpatico, everything we do is KPI and metric driven. So we're kind of a, put your money where your mouth is type business. So we publish our KPIs and stats directly to our customers everywhere. They get full dashboards, and that includes all of the BDR. So I know somebody asked the question earlier, do customers, actual end users, get access to the portals? And we give every one of them access to that so they can see what's going on. We want them to have confidence and know that we're managing it appropriately, not just that the technology works and is doing what it's supposed to, but we're managing it and making sure that it's effective.
Excellent. So you got my follow-up question there. So that was awesome. So next we'll go into what's your favorite feature that we provide?
I would say without a doubt, it's the orchestration. For me, when we talk about DR, especially DR as a service, again, it's not enough to have just a technology that will do a backup for you. It's having the ability to restore that, having actionable plans to be able to execute when a disaster happens. So having an orchestration plan where you can go in and pre-stage a boot up sequence. So I know my domain controller is going to come up before my database servers, before my application servers, before my terminal servers. Being able to stage all of those things ahead of time so that I just click a button and everything boots up in the right sequence with the right timing is huge. I'm a huge proponent of plan now so that you're not having to react later. And I think that's definitely the tool for that.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, when you have a disaster, there's a lot of chaos going on. The last thing you want to think about is reading through a DR plan. So it's great that we have that digital run book for you. So let's go ahead and jump into the last thing. When's the time that IBDR has saved the day for you guys as a company?
Oh man, we use these tools all the time. Whether it's a user that's deleted files and it's kind of the typical backup scenario, or it's somebody. We had to pull out something for a legal hold. Maybe there was litigation that happened and we need to go pull a backup from years ago against an Exchange server. Being able to roll back to those backups, boot it up on-prem and export a mailbox, we do that. But I would say that the biggest thing, especially here lately, is the huge amount of ransomware that we're seeing across the board. Any one user clicks on a link, now maybe their device is compromised, or it could be anything that they have access to on a file share is compromised. Being able to restore that quickly and easily and overwrite the same directory is fantastic. We do a lot of endpoint detection and we can catch those things, but they're going to have some amount of damage before they're detected and before that remediation happens. So being able to restore those things quickly and being able to get that back to an operational status for customers is huge. And we see that happen right now. We're seeing ransomware attacks about 2 to 3 times a week at this point with the number of customers that we have. So it's a huge problem that's out there, and we use this tool to help solve that a lot.
Excellent. So we'll look at Cory's favorite feature here. We're going to look at our cloud orchestration feature. Now, DR runbooks have been a thing since the beginning of time. They used to be written, now they're digital. So we come in here and we look at our dashboard and we go to DR sites and appliances. I can come in and I can say that I want to go and manage my cloud appliance. Now what that's going to do is boot up the interface for our cloud appliance. We come over here to boot. We can see nothing's booted up, but now we have an orchestration tab, which is unique to the cloud side. And this lets us drag and drop from the left to the right, whatever order we want to boot things up and bring them online and put in some timing. So here I'll add a wait right here. So between booting up our web servers and our clients, I'm gonna wait 60 seconds. Now all I gotta do is hit save. It's gonna acknowledge that I've saved that and we're ready to go. And then whenever I have a DR situation, I can just click run. It's gonna come up and tell me, all right, great, we're gonna go ahead and boot up your orchestration. And we can see here in active, it's already thrown over all 6 of those machines, and it's gonna boot those machines up in the correct order. Now, one thing I do like to throw out there whenever I've edited things for time is I have edited this for time. So this actual boot up took about 9 minutes to boot all of these machines up and running. But as we saw in the previous window, I have a whole bunch of wait timers in there. So we were waiting 2-3 minutes between booting up different sets of machines. But again, the entire thing, even including the 5 minutes of waiting, took right around 9-10 minutes to get all the machines up and running in the correct boot order.
Just a quick question on the one thing that I found once you get, I guess, probably at a larger scale, is the question of networking. Are you assuming that the bulk of your clients are basically one subnet and that's their office? Could you instantiate, for example, an environment which had a DMZ with a firewall in between them, or do you basically try to put everything into one network when you do the restores?
But we can do site-to-site failover. We can do VPN site-to-site. We can do localized VPN. We can do MPLS. We can do multiple VLANs. We just add more network cards to be able to control those different VLANs. So we have flexibility around covering all that, but it's very specific to customer environments. And luckily, that's something we include with our implementation assistance, is drilling down and figuring out the right way to set everything up for it.
Okay, so in the cloud, you would be able to say, and we have these networks and they are joined together in such a way so that I can route between them if need be.
So yeah, we can actually do stacked appliances in the cloud and tie those networks together, and then also separate those networks if we needed to.
Okay.
And if I can jump in right quick, when we do a lot of these implementations, we again pre-plan those things, but we'll actually set up like an L2TP type tunnel so that we can boot everything in the cloud and still have all of the same perimeter networking. The users on site don't know that anything's changed really. There may be a couple extra milliseconds of time, but for the most part, they have no idea that anything's even changed.
Okay, and that's really at the MSP level where you've got that expertise of knowing how to set those pieces up.
It is. We typically, when we're going in, we're helping manage the network side, but we also will do some of that planning. So whether they've got on-site IT or if we're managing that full network stack, we'll kind of coordinate that with them.
Simpatico is one of our customers that has a large fleet deployment. We also have an MSP that specializes in dental practices. In this case, two unique things about this situation. One, it's a dentist office, so the local boot is actually required. Unfortunately, you can't see a dentist remotely to get your teeth cleaned. So that is something they require for their practice software. The other thing that's very unique about this is this large fleet of dental offices, many in rural locations that have very low bandwidth, which is why we spent a little time talking about why our product works really well in those low bandwidth environments. And the last point, Cory had a great set of installs. This customer rolled out 180 installs in 6 months, and they're currently over 400. So we are scaling for that fleet story for sure. In this section, we set up two different scenarios. One was fleet, and the other was the distributed site scenario. And as you can imagine, just looking at the scales that we're talking about, that management ease is very important. How do we deploy the same? How do we manage the same? How do we manage across them? And literally in a couple slides, we're going to get to the management interface. But for talking about these distributed scenarios, multi-site scenarios, what's a little different about these is the company. So instead of the MSP deploying to many, many, many companies, it's the MSP deploying to the same company many, many times. So the consistency of sizing, the consistency of operations, the consistency of management, especially if they're going to share a common network, and in the question that Cory just answered, become paramount. So I want to set a little bit more mindset around this, is that whomever these companies, end companies are, they're typically providing some type of in-person operation or in-person service. So that boot local, but boot in the cloud because I'm part of something bigger is really imperative. You can't imagine walking up to a hotel or a parking lot provider and not being able to address your reservations. So we have two stories here to talk about the multi-site scenario. The first is
hey Brian, before you get into that, I'm struggling here to try to understand the infrastructure in the cloud that's provided with one of these licenses. So in the case where Simpatico had 600 customers that were all doing, disaster recovery, you'd have 600 separate physical appliances in your infrastructure to do that, or you would virtualize them, or
Well, in this case, that's 600 different companies. So yes, for the primary, that would be 600 appliances.
I understand the primary, but I'm talking about the infrastructure cloud that you could potentially
yes,
disaster recovery to.
and those are virtualized. So
those are virtualized.
Those are virtualized. So
but effectively they're purchasing the likelihood that of n number of VMs, let's say 10 VMs, whatever the infrastructure to support that in a disaster recovery scenario would be, plus the storage is all part of that infrastructure that they're purchasing with that IBDR license.
That's right. Right, because a lot of the technology that we're talking here for backup is about the processing of that data and making sure that it's deduplicated, compressed, encrypted. So a lot of the work to keep that and have that speed at their disposal is the management of those backups, right? The restore is not happening as frequently as what the backup needs are. But that is virtualized. We do have the opportunity in some cases to make them physical, but most of our customers, it looks just like public cloud. It's virtualized.
I got you. All right, thanks.
Okay, great. So 2 stories here. One is about a healthcare company. So think about medical services. If you want to think about something more specific, think about dialysis services. So easy to deploy, 50 remote locations, making sure that they have their data secure locally and in the cloud, ability to boot up on either VMware or Hyper-V, and being able to deploy that quickly. So this is thinking about who the customer is and what their needs are, as well as what the MSP's needs are to roll them out. I think we have, with the next story, Chris is going to take us through something even more specific.
Sure, absolutely. So this is actually a call that I've had recently where I was talking to a company that provides parking services. So they manage about 75 parking lots throughout the Northeast. And in each one of those parking lots, they have a couple core servers that they have. So they have their POS, so what's processing all their transactions. They have a key management system. And then they have another system that's kind of a file share / employee check-in, check-out time card system. Now, one of the problems that they run into is because they have all these different locations and they're managing them from, not necessarily local to all of these locations, is if something comes down, they have to spend $1,500 to send a third party out just to show up to help troubleshoot the issue. So the ability to be able to boot things up on top of our appliance and get everything back up and running almost instantly is a huge benefit to them. That way they can kind of defer that cost and they can, go out and troubleshoot these issues and kind of lower that SLA so they can bring that cost down. Now, they do have a bunch of different environments that they're managing. So everything from physical to Hyper-V again. And this is another place where us having that integrated Hyper-V support is very important. Now, the last thing that we're looking at with them is, so when you go to park your car or check into a hotel or any of the other multi-site locations we brought up, if you pull in and their systems are down, you can't use them. So they're actually losing money every second that they're down. They're unable to retrieve cars every second that they're down. So it's one of those things where having an outage directly impacts their business. And that's something we're looking at. Our IBDR and our backup solution was very important to them. And another one of their big concerns was security and encryption. So again, being able to encrypt on that local appliance, in transit, and in the cloud was very important to them.